Is this microphone on? Can everybody hear me? Yeah. Right. It's a pleasure to be here this morning. It's great to see so many familiar faces. I know on such a sunny day as this, it's a tough thing to come inside and sit through a bit of a conference, but I'd like to welcome you all. And I see quite a number of faces here of folks that have taken advantage of the ASF's silviculture program in the last 20 years. So welcome to everyone. So today I'm just here to talk about our current programs, including the silviculture incentives that we offer, as well as the Fiona cleanup program assistance, which is being coordinated through the Association for Sustainable Forestry. And I just want to say that I was very heartened by the words of Deputy Minister Getchan this morning with regards to the improvement and consistency of timing for silviculture funding, and I think it's a great step forward. Good progress being made there. And wasn't Ron a wonderful speaker? I think there's a guy that he could probably sell himself on YouTube pretty easily. Maybe he already has. Anyway, I'll get going with our presentation here. So ASF currently administers private land silviculture funding to both small private woodlot owners as well as large non-industrial landowners. And every year that those programs are very popular, and we try to keep up with the current rates and criteria that allow landowners to get the work done in the woods. We also offer, through the ASF, some training for Department of Natural Resources and Renewables employees, plus forest industry and private land practitioners in regards to the new, well, it's not much new anymore, the Forest Ecosystem Classification system, which the department has put into place, and it's a great system, the FEC, and if any of you who have not taken any training in it or who are not familiar with it have an opportunity, I'd encourage you to become familiar with it. As well, we conduct some training sessions for pre-treatment assessments on private land and also on Crown land. And so all the PTA training pretty much comes through the ASF at this point. Just last year, we initiated a new training module on biodiversity assessment, and we worked with, I'm sure you know, a local wildlife biologist, Mark Pulsifer, who conducted these biodiversity training sessions for landowners and forest professionals. And of course, our big claim to fame lately has been the cleanup from Fiona on both non-industrial private land and also to help industry contractors working on industrial land as well. So both of those sectors have so far benefited from the funding that was made available from the department, and I can say that this program is moving along with great success and momentum. And before I get too far along, I should introduce two of our staff members who are here today. Ed McLean, who looks after mostly silviculture. Stand up, Ed. A lot of you may be familiar with Ed. And also at the back there, Paul Gilbert, who is coordinating the Fiona program. So these two guys lend a great helping hand when things get hectic, and they have been hectic. So some of the silviculture treatments quickly that ASF offers some funding assistance for include fill planting and full planting, some early competition control, pre-commercial thinning for both natural and planted stands, commercial thinning, which is thinning trees once they become a merchantable size, selection management, which is uneven age management of forest stands, and the last two categories, crop tier release and crop tier pruning, which seems to be fairly popular for landowners who wish to do the work by themselves. So these are two sort of value-added categories of silviculture that landowners can greatly enhance the value of standing trees. So just some quick slides here of planting and other treatments, so everyone knows what a tree plantation looks like, although they're not always in this sort of pristine condition. There's a lot of plantations out there that have a lot of competing vegetation, hardwoods and other softwoods, and usually those are treated with through our program with clearing saws in a we call it manual weeding, although weeding might not be the best term for it, but it helps the planted trees grow. Pre-commercial thinning, which would be carried out on trees once they reach a sort of 2 meter to 7 meter stage for softwoods and 6 to 9 meters for hardwoods. Pre-commercial thinning is done to reduce the density of stems on a site, freeing up the crowns of the trees so that they can grow faster. So this is what a pre-commercial thinning, even though these are fairly small trees, this is what it looks like after we were impacted by Fiona on September 23rd, and I was just amazed to see so much damage in pre-commercially thin stands of such small diameter. I expected to see lots of damage, and there is lots of damage in larger trees, but even the small trees in these thinnings were impacted. So silviculture produces valuable coarse woody material for to enhance the biodiversity of a site, and here we see some coarse woody material generated by pre-commercial thinning, and this is the coarse woody material generated by Fiona. And there's quite a difference, as you can see. Many areas were completely blown down, wind thrown, and many landowners are still in the process of scratching their heads, wondering just how they're going to clean it up. This is a picture, an aerial shot, which was fairly popular, I think, back in October. This is, I believe, on Dalhousie Mountain down in Pictou County, and you can just see the amount of wind throw that occurred when Fiona came through the area. It's just like somebody took a hand and flattened huge swaths of trees. So this is pretty typical, wandering through the woods down in Pictou County or Colchester County, Antigonish County, any areas impacted by Fiona. You're just sort of faced with this wall of vegetation that is almost impossible to climb through and very difficult to assess in many cases. Even younger stands that have not been thinned, stands that contain trembling aspen and fir, small spruce, white birch, gray birch, all of those stands there didn't seem to be any distinction between stands impacted by Fiona, whether they were early succession or late successional larger trees. So one example is this commercial thinning in a hardwood stand that is down in Colchester County, and you can see that this is one of the ASF funded commercial thinnings in a yellow birch sugar maple stand, and that was totally impacted by Fiona, and so this is what it looked like during the cleanup when the contractor went in. And you can see that the contractor's leaving piles of brush for biodiversity, and certainly leaving as many standing trees as possible, as long as they're not loosened and leaning from the vertical by the wind. So it's quite a mess in some places. Also, with some of the new silviculture treatments, such as irregular shelterwoods, there were many of those sites that were impacted by Fiona. in northern Nova Scotia, and this irregular shelterwood was damaged quite heavily. And as you can see, some stands are still, or some trees are still standing, and once a site like this is cleaned up, those trees will still be standing. In many areas, water courses were completely obliterated. In other words, buried by vegetation. And this brook here in the Mount Tom area, it was quite a sizable water course. And walking through there last winter, it was impossible to even find the brook at all. So to avoid, all the hard work of trying to navigate through the down woody vegetation caused by Fiona, and to avoid, getting into dangerous situations, because it's not really a safe thing walking through some of this woodland that has got overhanging trees and broken tops and other hazards. So the ASF invested in a couple of drones, and we've used these to some success. The drones that we purchased were Mavic Enterprise 3s, which are kind of top of the line. They've got really excellent cameras in them. They're quite easy to use. You just take the control panel there to the woods, and with the drone, and you plot the course of what you want the drone to fly, and the drone takes off and flies that course, and then comes back and lands exactly from where it took off. And, so Ed and Paul have both become drone experts to a degree, and any landowners that wish to have their properties flown by drones, just contact us, and we can certainly consider that. So just another, this is an example of an aerial photo taken by drone, and this is actually of my own property in River John, and it's a corner of the woodlot, and you can just see that everything was flattened, pretty near every single tree. Mostly oaks and red maples, some trembling aspen as well, but it was pretty much a broad brush approach, and there were not many standing trees left. So I included this picture just to give you an idea of what an aerial drone photo looks like, and as you can tell, it really saves a person from knocking themselves on the head trying to walk through this stuff that is all wind thrown. Here's another aerial drone image. This would be taken from probably 300 feet, something like that, and you can see that in this image the softwood trees stand out a lot better than the hardwood trees, and that's one thing about the drone images, is when they're taken vertically, sometimes the damage to hardwood trees is difficult to assess, but the softwood trees stand out a lot better. Just another image of a water course with trees that are wind thrown, and you can see again how well the softwood trees stand out in this image. So drones really are a very useful and practical tool in assessing damage on folks' woods lots. So currently, these are the eligibility categories for cleanup assistance. In the first place, your woodlot or your forest stand must have at least 50% wind throw. In other words, at least half the trees must be blown down, or leaning at least 15 degrees from the vertical. And there are many trees out there that are still standing, which of course are leaning now and have been loosened. And the root mass is quite fragile, and I'm sure a lot of those trees will come down in the next year or two, if we get any more wind. The categories and rates for any sites which have more than 75% wind throw, we call that severe wind throw, and that rate is paid out at $475 a hectare, and the rate can either be paid to the landowner or to the contractor. And our experience to date is that it mostly goes to the contractor, because these are rates that are to help assist with the cleanup itself, the cleanup operations. These rates are not meant to in any way sort of compensate landowners for lost wood value. This is simply to clean up the areas. The second category there of 50 to 75% wind throw, we call that moderate, and that's fundable at $250 a hectare. And then, of course, across a woodlot, there are many varying degrees of wind throw, and we have a blended category for that, where wind throw must be at least moderate. So $365 a hectare. And just recently, the department has agreed to help offset the cost of cleaning up hardwood stands in particular, or stands that contain more than 50% hardwood. And this has turned out to be a very valuable category, one that we certainly wish to express our appreciation to the department for. So if there's more than 50% hardwood in the stand, and it needs to be cleaned up with more than 50% wind throw, then that's $1,000 a hectare. So once an area is cleaned up, how do we know that it passes the criteria? There must be some evidence of wood products being removed, and it must be left in a condition that's suitable for either natural regeneration or planting follow-up. There's no real time limit on this, but we're looking for the potential to have 70% stocking on the site. In other words, the site should have a distribution of at least 70% coverage with trees. And we're looking at 2.4 meter spacing in the long run. And of course, the last criteria there, where future silviculture operations must not be hindered by hazardous trees or excessive material. That's kind of, you can take that with a bit of a grain of salt, because excessive material is sometimes, if there are brush piles left, that's good for wildlife habitat and for biodiversity. So we have no real, parameters with regards to excessive material, but it's certainly good to get any hazardous trees out of there that might impede, tree planting or some other operation in the future. So examples of cleaned up sites can range from anything like this, where there's still a lot of slash on the site, and to go in and try and plant that, you're really looking for trying to find some areas where a tree can be planted. So there's many examples of very rough sites out there which have been cleaned up, and I know they're just going to be planting nightmares in the future if people decide to plant it. Here's another example of a cleaned up site, and I threw this slide in just to indicate that, a site does not have to be clear cut in order to be considered cleaned up. That there can be standing trees left on the site, to whatever degree the contractor and landowner wish, as long as they're not, of a hazardous nature, standing dead snags or something that might impede future silviculture operations. We also have a funding assistance program for boundary line renewal, or for boundary line identification and retracement. And any areas that qualify or any lines that qualify need to be next to an area that is in the process of being cleaned up or has been cleaned up. And the line location should be clearly marked with flagging tape or something similar. And we strongly encourage that any boundary retracement or establishment, for instance, if a boundary line is difficult to find, you don't know exactly where it is, or if a boundary line needs to be surveyed, certainly that should be done under the supervision or the guidance or or in the employment of a Nova Scotia licensed land surveyor. So the rates for boundary line identification right now are $500 a kilometer, and for boundary line establishment, in other words, if a line has to be surveyed again, that rate is $1,500 a kilometer. And here's an example of, what a boundary line might look like before it's cleaned out, and you can see what a jumbled mess there is there. And the landowner has gone through with some flagging tape, just trying to find remnants of the boundary line after Fiona has impacted the woodlot. So from all of this, of course, we learned a few things. Certainly Fiona was the amount of damage that Fiona did to woodlots, the impact that that hurricane had was a surprise to many people. And the first Fiona takeaway there is kind of a given that storms and their effects can be unpredictable. Certainly here in Nova Scotia, where we're kind of stuck out like a thumb into the North Atlantic, it's hard to predict the effects of wind on our forests and woodlots. In consultation with department staff, of course, we all agree on this, that we shouldn't be putting all of our silviculture eggs in one basket. In other words, a diversity of silviculture treatments is far better than to, stick with one or two treatments exclusively. And across people's woodlots, it's important to maintain several successional stages. In other words, several age classes of trees, and also the stages of succession in the development of a climax forest, so that you may have some stands of intolerant hardwood and some stands of tolerant hardwood, which are later successional. It's important to conserve as many successional stages as possible. Also, across the landscape, we want to have that diversity of species and ages, and of course, successional stages. And the next point, considering site safety during cleanup, can't be emphasized enough, because we've all seen many, in our travels, we've seen many dangerous situations where folks are maybe working with a power saw and you just don't know what tree is going to let loose next. Folks are attacking these huge piles of vegetation with a chainsaw, and it's just a matter of time before somebody gets seriously hurt. And we encourage, equipment to work as much as possible in these dangerous sites to avoid personal injury to the workers. But many landowners are convinced they want to carry a cleanup work on their own. We still don't know what the magnitude of wildfire risk is going to be. We know there's a lot of downed trees and brush out there. We're waiting with bated breath to see what the wildfire risk is going to be in the future. And I know that the Department of Natural Resources and Renewables is working steadfastly to try and match up things like site characteristics and vulnerability to wind throw. So there's also a program being carried out through Forest Nova Scotia for road cleanup, and Todd Burgess is here somewhere. Todd, stand up. So Todd, if you're interested in getting some road cleanup done post Fiona, Todd is the guy to speak with. So this is an example of a road before it's been cleaned up and then after it's been cleaned up. So a lot of work goes into Fiona cleanup. So here's Todd's contact information. And he'll be around most of the day, I think, if you want to speak with him. And we have a little booth out front or in the lobby there, the ASF. If you'd like to speak with any one of us, either myself or Ed McLean or Paul Gilbert will be around for most of the day, and I want to thank you for your time and for the nice reception here. Thank you.